Most of us believe that spiritual decline only begins with obvious outward wrongdoings. But in reality, it often starts with things that seem completely harmless. This erosion doesn't come from a single massive shock, but from the repeated, familiar, and unnoticed influences that you might be standing in right now. Today, we will uncover the mechanism of these dangerous conversations and how you can protect the spiritual clarity of your life. Think about a coffee date with friends, or simply scrolling through a group chat buzzing with notifications. Nothing obviously wrong is happening. It's just a few sarcastic jokes, a bit of judgment, or a tone heavy with cynicism. You don't really participate, but you stay. You don't fully agree, but you don't leave either. That prolonged silence slowly turns into familiarity, and this familiarity begins to shift the deepest perceptions within you. This video is here to help you identify the conversations that seem normal but are quietly eroding your faith. We're going to understand why they are so dangerous and how to respond with true wisdom. If you've ever felt your heart grow heavy after a conversation and couldn't explain why, I invite you to share that experience in the comments as we walk through this together. Because the issue isn't found in a single isolated sentence. It's found in the way those voices function in your daily life. The truth is, a conversation is never just a conversation. What enters your life through conversation rarely looks dangerous at first. We often assume that words are just information, neutral data. You hear it, you filter it, and you think you're fine. But the truth is, a conversation is never just a conversation. It carries an atmosphere. It carries hidden assumptions. It carries a moral framing that sits quietly behind every tone of voice. As believers, we sometimes get arrogant. We think we're strong enough to listen to anything without being moved. We're very good at guarding our behavior, but we're dangerously loose at guarding our participation. Look at your daily reality. The group chats buzzing nonstop, the voice notes playing in the background, the comment threads filled with sarcasm, or the raw and honest podcasts that are actually just breeding grounds for criticism. Proverbs 13:3 reminds us, "Those who guard their lips preserve their lives, but those who speak rashly will come to ruin." But guarding isn't just about what you say. It's about what you allow to run as the background noise of your soul. Imagine someone who never looks for trouble, but every single day they're in a group chat filled with mockery and crude humor. At first, it's cringy, but a few months later, what used to be off suddenly feels normal. This shift doesn't happen through a direct attack. It happens through micro-exposure, tiny, repeated doses of influence. The thing that is actually shaping you might not be the sermon you hear on Sunday. It might be the conversations you permit every other day of the week. Because the real danger isn't in a one-time encounter. It's in the repetition that you've stopped noticing. What you resist once can become what you barely notice later. The process of spiritual erosion doesn't usually start with a massive scandal or a sudden crash. It happens in the silence. It happens through repetition. When a cynical tone, a crude joke, or a distorted way of thinking is repeated often enough, your mind simply stops fighting back. This is the gradual dulling of your discernment. At first, you're uncomfortable. Then you're familiar. And finally, you accept it as normal. Your resistance hasn't been conquered. It has been eroded by familiarity. The Bible warns us clearly in 1 Corinthians 15:33, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." This corruption doesn't happen overnight. It is the result of consistent, steady exposure. Think about the person who initially feels a sting in their heart when they hear something holy being mocked. But after a few weeks, they stay silent. After a few months, they start laughing along. Or someone who constantly consumes cynical content, only to find one day that their heart is no longer soft toward the truth. The problem often isn't with evil people out there. The problem is the familiar environment of words you breathe in every single day. Silent erosion, toxic familiarity, paralyzed resistance. Are you allowing those repeated voices to quietly restructure your soul? Because when a lie is repeated long enough, it doesn't have to fight for acceptance anymore. It simply becomes normal. By now, you've started to understand the mechanism. But this is where we have to get honest with ourselves. The problem is no longer about what they are saying. The real question is, what is happening inside of you? There are things that should have caused you pain, but now you find them completely normal. You don't even notice they're there anymore because they've become part of the very air you breathe. But be careful. This normalization is exactly where the truth begins to be distorted. So what has quietly shifted its place in your mind without you even realizing it? We're going to deconstruct those dangerous zones of normal right now. The heart rarely changes all at once. It adjusts by degree. Normalization doesn't make your convictions disappear instantly. It just makes the edges of those convictions start to blur. That is how normality steals your discernment. It doesn't arrive as a checklist of sins. It arrives through subtle, natural patterns. It's the mockery of what is holy disguised as humor. It's the gossip disguised as concern. It's the compromise softened by repeated justification. There is always a pattern. First, there is distance. Then, there is tolerance. And finally, there is participation. Psalm 1 verse 1 describes this progression perfectly. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers. Do you see the movement? Walking, then standing, then sitting. Most people don't fall into error because of a sudden rebellion. They fall because they've lived long enough in the wrong tone. There is a thin line between an honest question and irreverence, between true compassion and endorsement of wrong, between useful information and plain gossip. When you allow these voices to run in the background long enough, your internal standard drops without you ever noticing. You don't see it as wrong anymore, you just see it as normal. That is the quiet turning point. Before a person changes outwardly, they usually start changing inwardly in what they accept as true. The conversations you keep don't just affect your mood, they are quietly rewriting how you see yourself, how you see others, and ultimately, how you perceive the character of God. This identity drift usually happens in three dangerous ways. First, constant comparison turns faithfulness into a performance. Second, self-promotion turns service into image management. And finally, cynical questioning about God's goodness turns trust into suspicion. We must make a very clear distinction. There is a massive difference between a doubt brought honestly before God and a suspicion fed casually among people. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 12, warns that those who measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves are not wise. When you stay too long in conversations that revolve only around who is better, you slowly lose the joy in the specific calling God has for you. You start sharing a testimony, but you find yourself checking people's reactions more than your faithfulness before Him. You linger in environments of doubt, and suddenly, you find yourself praying with a faith that has grown dangerously thin. Your identity doesn't change because of a single sentence. It changes because of the atmosphere of words you allow to surround you. Many people think they are still holding on to their faith when in reality, their internal compass has already shifted. Are you still the person God called you to be? Or are you becoming a reflection of the conversations you refuse to leave? The drift is subtle, but the destination is entirely different. Most people do not lose clarity in one moment. They lose it in layers. Failure rarely begins with visible behavior. It begins when discernment is no longer sharp. You stop recognizing the wrong tone. You miss the warning signs in things that used to be crystal clear. And eventually, you can no longer tell the difference between a holy conviction and a minor discomfort. This is the reality of spiritual dullness. You find it easy to laugh at things that once felt wrong. You find it easy to linger in talk that leaves your soul feeling heavy. You lose the ability to feel the gap between true wisdom and empty noise. Philippians 4, verse 8, calls us to fix our thoughts on whatever is true, noble, and right. But when discernment fades, you easily slide into arguments, divisions, and loyalties that don't belong to God. Everything we've discussed, the mockery, the gossip, the comparison, the suspicion, it all converges here. It's no longer just a list of habits. It's a picture of a blinded heart. The person who was once sensitive to division is now drowning in arguments just to be right. The one who avoided gossip now calls it discerning people. The question isn't, what have you done? The question is, do you even realize what is making you numb? You didn't lose your clarity in a single act of rebellion. You lost it because you grew comfortable with the fog. Climax. Read firmly. You do not become what you hate first, but what you stop guarding against. Wisdom is not only knowing what to say, but knowing what not to sit inside. Discernment is not about fear, isolation, or staying silent in every hard moment. Instead, it's the clarity to know when to stay, when to redirect, and when to quietly step away. Put a practical filter on your participation. Is this conversation making your heart brighter or heavier? Is it building truth, love, and reverence, or is it blurring them? Is staying here an act of faithfulness or just a habit you can't break? Jesus engaged people deeply, but he never surrendered his mission to the tone of the crowd around him. Ephesians 4, verse 29 reminds us, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs." Setting a boundary is not a sign of weakness. It is a vital part of your spiritual stewardship. Not every argument in the church chat needs your voice. Not every raw discussion is actually helpful. Sometimes, maturity is changing the subject. Sometimes it's silence. And sometimes, it's simply leaving the loop. Be intentional with your presence. Because what shapes your spiritual future is not just what you pursue, it's what you refuse to allow to stay in your life. In the end, what shapes your spiritual life isn't found in a few major decisions, but in what you allow to repeat in your mind every single day. The conversations you choose to stay in, the tones you gradually accept, they are quietly becoming your internal standard. But remember, you are not passive in your environment. Discernment is not a restrictive boundary. It is a holy protection to keep your heart sensitive to the voice of God. If you have stayed until this moment to deconstruct the zones of normal with me, then you are someone who refuses to settle for a shallow faith. You care more about the integrity of your inner world than outward appearances. This is the path of true maturity, a journey that isn't loud, but is deeply intentional and clear. Together, we grow in deep wisdom and quiet strength for the journey ahead. As you look back on your recent conversations, is there a specific tone or a thread of thought you now realize you need to change or quietly step away from? I invite you to share one practical step you'll take to guard your clarity in the comments below. And if you're looking to continue this journey of building a faith with depth and discernment, I'd be honored to have you join us for the conversations to come. You are not alone in this process, and you have the power to choose wisdom.